Okay, I have great pleasure in introducing our next speaker. Tahir Janmohamed is the CEO of Managing Life, a Toronto-based digital health company dedicated to improving the lives of people with chronic pain. Managing Life's digital solution, Manage My Pain, has been collaborating with the Transitional Pain Service since 2016. Prior to Managing Life, Tahir spent 8 years as a management consultant with IBM's strategy and analytics practice. Tahir is a professional engineer and an MBA from the University of Toronto. And I recall very vividly when we first met, which was with Hans and Rita Katz-Nelson and a student of mine, Vered Latman, in the hyperbaric unit in the basement of TGH, which, by the way, was February 20th, Friday morning at 9 a.m., all right? Yeah, you're wondering about my prodigious memory. I just looked it up in my calendar. So, Tahir, please give a warm welcome to Tahir Janmohamed.
So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today. So as you've heard, there's some fantastic work that's being done by the Transitional Pain Service and in chronic pain in general. But today what I'm going to talk to you about is what is the role of digital health as services like the Transitional Pain Service are created and try to scale up. And digital health has a different meaning depending on who you talk to. Even within the Transitional Pain Service, our role as a company and our solution evolved. It started off at the very basic outcome collection. Try to measure what patients are going through. It slowly evolved into actually monitoring patients in between visits, virtually, through telemedicine, through COVID. And now we're starting to see that the role of digital health solutions like ours can do more than just collecting data. It can actually provide additional tools and supports to equip people to self-manage their condition outside of the clinic. And I'm going to share a couple of advancements that we're taking this product and digital health within TPS, moving into the world of prediction. And I'll share some initial results there. And you've heard it alluded to by, I think, Max, the digital therapeutic side of that. So what that means is trying to replace some of the traditional ways of delivering services through a digital-only platform. And that's what's called digital therapeutics. Now, before I talk about that, I want to talk a little bit about myself. Joel gave a little bit about my background. I do not come from healthcare. I'm a computer engineer, MBA, management consultant with IBM. And it was really my time at IBM when I was working with IBM Watson. I don't know if you remember that, but it was IBM's branding of AI way back when. And it was my time at IBM where I really understood the power of data to help make better treatment decisions. But I personally didn't care about helping big companies. I wanted to see if there was more of an impact that I could make on individual lives. And I tried to use my experience, data, technology, and brought it to the world of healthcare. Now, why did I choose chronic pain? My mom has severe fibromyalgia, so I grew up with her telling her doctors, my dad, you just don't get what I'm going through. So I thought if I could bring data to the conversation to people like my mom and the doctors who treat her, maybe there could be a better communication and better treatments could be come up with. And so while I was at IBM, I created a simplified pain tracking app, a way for my mom, people like my mom, to record what they were going through so that when they went to their doctors, they could say, this is what my pain looks like. And before I met Joel and Hans and the rest of the folks, this was the chart. I actually pulled it up that I shared with them at that first meeting. We had a pain tracking screen, there were some charts and graphs, and there were reports that you could take out. And it was the only pain app on the market at the time. I was really proud about it. It was 62,000 downloads and 325 reviews. These were big, meaningful statistics at the time to me. But it allowed me to then connect with Hans, Joel, and others at the first meeting in January 2015, which he had mentioned. So that's the hyperbaric chamber in the background. That's where we met. And I essentially came up to them and I said, I've created this app that people with pain are actually using. Is there any way that we could work together and see if we could integrate this into what you're doing? And thankfully, they were visionary. And they saw the opportunity of using digital health to evolve what they had already done. And I think one of the biggest changes, the biggest success factors is that we got started right away. Meaning we started using it in a randomized control trial to collect pain outcomes. It was a hyperbaric study for fibromyalgia, and instead of asking people to write down their pain scores on a piece of paper using daily logs, they were given tablets with their app preloaded and just started recording it. I think there was 20 patients or something like that that started using it. But we used it within a couple of months, and I thought that was a huge point of success, is just get it out there and learn from that experience, as opposed to trying to answer all the questions beforehand and actually evolve from that. And in that first study, there were problems that came up. And these were the three main themes that kind of came up out of that first study. The first is pain scores are, by themselves, not sufficient. We need to measure function, and that's missing in our app at the time. We also have all these paper-based questionnaires that we still need to use to conduct RCTs. The GAT-7, PHQ-9, pain intensity, all of these fantastic things, and they were still being deployed through pen and paper. And then finally, the reports are too long. So I don't know if you can see that. That's page 1 of 188. Message received. It's not going to work. So we used that, and through the initial results of that first study, we co-applied for some fantastic innovation grants, and we evolved the application and the solution in conjunction with a number of different stakeholders: patients, clinicians, psychology, our tech expertise, our UX folks. And we actually started introducing new features over time. So one of the biggest introductions or evolutions of Manage My Pain to go from just a pain tracking app was the introduction of a daily reflection. So Lisa Weinrib was heavily involved in this, but it's based on acceptance and commitment therapy. And instead of asking people to record their pain, instead now our application would prompt them to reflect on what they did in their life that was meaningful and important to them that day. So it's a temporary self-reflection of accomplishment. What can you do despite your pain, as opposed to what can't you do because of your pain? And every questionnaire that you see that relates to pain, even today, leads with that negative. What can't you do? How much interference does it cause? How severe is it? Negative, negative, negative. So this is temporarily trying to take them out of that mindset. And then once people are in that positive mindset, then we would ask them about their pain. We then incorporated the standard paper-based questionnaires into our platform. So instead of pen and paper, now we could actually deploy the PHQ-9, the GAD-7, all of the questionnaires that people use directly through the platform. And that was a big evolution, because that was one of the biggest obstacles to widespread adoption of our solution. We improved the reports. So I remember Hans told me, he's like, I don't want 188 pages. I want those 2 graphs. Pain scores over time, function over time. You can get me that, that's gonna be a pretty big evolution. And so we eventually did that. We were able to produce these graphs that showed pain scores over time with a trend line and function over time. And it's not intended to be for research purposes or publication in a journal. It's intended to guide a clinical visit, to understand at a high level indication, is this person kind of doing better? Because if you talk to them on January 31st, what they're gonna tell you in that face-to-face visit is gonna be highly influenced by what they feel on that day. And so can we get a little bit more objectivity around that conversation? And then the final major introduction that we had was these concepts of clinical alerts. As more and more patients used our platform, we had the ability to look at the data that they were entering and actually flag certain patterns and trends. And we developed 33 of these alerts. So the new development of neuropathic pain, whether or not someone has symptoms consistent with excess opioid use. They were not recommendations, they were not treatments, they were not diagnoses, but again, indications to help guide treatment conversations. Now with these introductions, we were able to publish a lot of the research. There's 3 papers that I highlight here. One is the actual development of the evolution of Manage My Pain in conjunction with the TPS, how we actually got it into the hospital and in front of patients. There was an engagement study, I think Max was the lead on that one, that showed that people were willing to use Manage My Pain. I think we had a 30-day retention rate of 62%. That means from the time they register it to 30 days later, are you still using it? And then finally, we were able to do a multi-site controlled study that showed patients who use Manage My Pain alongside standard of care at 3 different clinics, TPS being one, Toronto Western, and then Iroquois Falls Family Health Team. Those patients saw clinically and statistically significant improvements in anxiety and pain catastrophizing. So a lot of time went into generating evidence and evolving the product. It was iterative. It wasn't, here's one product, let's use it. It's changing constantly. For a little bit of background, we put out a new version of our app every 2 weeks. I think we're on iteration 1200 or something of our app right now. But then COVID hit, and I think this was probably the biggest shift. It allowed us, TPS and Managing Life, to evolve away from just research and testing and development and publications into just using it as part of how TPS operates. And at this point, all the in-person visits stopped. And in May of 2020 is when we started introducing this as part of clinical standard of care, which means as soon as patients had an appointment, they were just asked to download and use the app. And as a result, the TPS was still able to collect outcome information. Those virtual visits still had data behind them. And so it allowed the TPS to continue to operate in the way that they did pre-COVID. And I believe that there was less of an impact that it could have had from a data collection perspective. So the way it works, Maria, the fantastic coordinator, asks every patient to just download the app, register. They have to activate it by clicking a link that's emailed to them, and then log in and answer the questionnaires. It's a fairly straightforward concept. Not everyone does it. You're never going to get 100% adoption. But this is getting rid of the step of getting consent to contact, having them fill out forms, having to go through all the risks. It just asks them to fill it out, and if they choose to use it, that's great. If they don't, that's fine. And what we saw is when we introduced it in 2020, it was about halfway through the year, we saw about a 45% adoption rate there. But the adoption rate went up during COVID. We had some challenges as in-person visits started again, but in the past quarter, simple changes to the email notifications that we send patients drives up that usage. Now, 3 out of every 4 patients are engaged in Manage My Pain, and that's a fantastic engagement rate from a digital health product, in my opinion. To give you a sense, the top performing digital health apps out there have a 30-day retention rate of 15%. That means 85% of people stop using a digital health product after 30 days. But what we managed to say is just because someone registered doesn't mean they use it. So we saw a 19% drop off since I think it's 2021 in terms of people that actually went on and used the application. So that means that we have 774 patients that have used Manage My Pain within the TPS since we introduced it in mid-2020. Now, the way it works is TPS issues a bunch of patient-reported outcome measures. The first visit has 12. It's a lot of questionnaires. Trying to bring that down to 5, I think that's the sweet spot, but there's 4 screeners included in that first batch. And then after that, there are 8 questionnaires on the follow-up visits. And so the 2 that I want to talk about a little bit more today are the bottom 2, which arguably are the most important. That's what Hans said, mentioned to us. Pain interference, how much has pain interfered in people's lives? And then finally their NRS, which is what is commonly talked about. And so what we were able to show, and thank you, Karen, for the amazing work wherever she is. She was able to pull out the data from the EMR systems, take the data from Manage My Pain, and create these fantastic graphs. We as a company don't have access to day 0. We don't know when that is. We just have the data in our solution. So it requires a collaboration between our organization to be able to produce this. But what this shows is that 96% of patients complete their questionnaires at that first visit. So you have fantastic adherence and completion rates. And then it slowly tapers over time. At around the 6-month mark, which is when TPS theoretically ends, and then it becomes a chronic pain patient or they transition back, we have about a 54% completion rate. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Patients could get better, and then they just stop responding to your emails and your notifications, which is fantastic. That's probably why you're not seeing a lot of those people answer those questions at that mark. And then you can see the chronic pain patients tend to engage back up again. So this is kind of in line with expectations. And when we look at the scores, again, thanks to Karen, it shows that the NRS scores, this is the average pain rating over time, decreases in the perisurgical population. So you heard from Karim, he had mentioned a 1-point drop in the NRS is clinically significant. We're seeing a 1.4 point drop in the population, the perisurgical population. Again, this is not a study, this is just real world evidence using clinically collected data. And you can see the chronic pain population doesn't really change, unfortunately, in that 6-month period from an NRS perspective. Karen also looked at the second questionnaire, which I think is important, pain interference. Similar response rates, slightly lower at the 6-month mark at around 50%, but in general, we're still capturing data 1 out of every 2 patients, even 6 months out, which I think is important. And if you look on the right-hand side of that graph, 66%, or 2 out of every 3 patients, are still providing outcome information 3 years from that first clinical visit. So that's fantastic longitudinal data capture that I don't think you can really get if you're using a hospital-based system. What's a little bit different about our solution is it follows the patient. It doesn't follow the clinic, meaning they can still use it before and after TPS. And even if they come back to TPS, now you still have all that baseline data. And what the score showed here is that in, again, the peri-surgical population, after 6 months, there is a clinically significant decrease on average. Again, I'm not the analytical type to analyze the numbers, but this is a T-score for the pain interference. A change in 2 is clinically significant, and so you're seeing that we're going from sorry, I keep looking down there, a decrease of 65.5 down to 63.8. In both populations, there's almost a clinically significant difference. So that's measuring what TPS already does, and now we're putting some numbers behind that. We're quantifying the impact. Obviously, there's been fantastic studies. This is the real-world evidence outside of a study, and you're still able to measure and quantify that impact. But this is where the data side of me gets really excited. So in January, we brought on James Skorick, who's a PhD from McGill, to build predictive machine learning modules using some of this data. So what he did was he took all the data from the first 30 days of usage in the app. That's the questionnaire responses, that's the day-to-day tracking, the pain records, the daily reflections, whatever data was available. And then the goal is to try to predict whether or not someone would have a clinically significant improvement, according to the pain interference score, within the next 6 months. And so what was involved in that was 160 patients from those 74 that had the data that we needed, and 253 potential features that went into this model. This isn't something that a human could really do. That's why it's machine learning. And you can see that there roughly half of the patients had a clinically significant improvement of about 45%. And then the average prediction period that we're looking at is about 2 months from that first visit. So it's about a month after the initial data is collected. And you can see the different categories of features that went into this model. What people put into the app in terms of the questionnaire responses, what they actually put into the pain records, the daily reflections, but also their demographic information. This is all self-reported in the app. None of this information comes from the EMR or the hospital systems. It's just the app information. And the results were an 81% accuracy in being able to predict whether or not someone would clinically improve within 6 months after the CPS. My understanding is this type of work hasn't really been done before. And it just speaks to the fact that if you can collect data, you can actually start doing some really interesting stuff from a prediction perspective. What this means is if someone's using the app for 30 days, we can tell you with an 81% accuracy whether or not they're going to improve or not. And that'll help prioritize resources. That might help screen and triage people to the appropriate people. We know that we have limitations on resources. We need to find the right care to the right people at the right time. And this is an opportunity area for doing that. This is obviously still a proof of concept. This is not something that we can integrate directly into clinical care, but the more data we collect, the more opportunities open up from a prediction perspective. Now in 2022, the evolution of Manage My Pain within the TPS starts to evolve. And as a company, we start to evolve. We're not just data collection. We have the ability to actually support people to self-manage their condition. And that's by giving them the educational content and the tools that they need to work on managing their pain outside of the clinic and in between visits, maybe as they transition back to primary care. So we rolled out the Pain Guide, which is a set of micro-learning modules written at a grade 6 level, inspired by ACT concepts that teach people about how pain works and introduce coping strategies. The vast majority of people living with chronic pain do not have access to the TPS or those 18 different clinics that were on that chart. The vast majority of people are seeing their primary care physician if they even have one. So if you truly want to reach the masses of people living with chronic pain, there needs to be a more scalable way that isn't dependent on people. And that is why we tried to reach out to people using our Pain Guide. As Joel may have mentioned, we have over 100,000 people using our app from 130 different countries in 7 different languages. The ability to reach a greater audience exists because we have the digital capabilities. And then Max had mentioned Adopt TPS, a different slide version of it. Can we try to replace group psychology with a self-guided digital mechanism that is entirely deployable to any hospital that's doing surgeries without the need for a psychologist if they don't have the resources to do so? It obviously is not going to replace what is done at the TPS, but it's better than the current status quo, which is nothing. These people aren't getting these types of supports. And I think this is a fantastic opportunity to reach people that simply aren't getting reached today. So that's what I want to share with you today. Happy to take any questions or find me afterwards.
Thanks. This is all very exciting stuff, and I'm super excited to see what this can do to enrich care. So a bit of context for my question. My background is working with people with vision loss, a bit of inclusive design. Digital accessibility is a big area of interest. So what I'd be curious about is, have there been kind of, it's a, big area and big challenge to tackle, and accessibility goes beyond just what the guidelines say for WCAG, which I don't remember what it stands for, but our accessibility guidelines out there. So I'd be curious what's been done to take a look at kind of the digital access needs, and or what might be coming in the future to support people at the intersections of chronic pain and like vision loss, neurodiversity, et cetera, who might have difficulty accessing digital tools.
Yeah, it's a great question. So as a company, the way that we try to tackle this is by integrating with the existing accessibility opportunities and options within the operating system. So Android has its own stuff, Apple has its own stuff. We just make sure that we work with that. So there's screen readers there's certain contrast guidelines, as you mentioned. So we design our app to meet those guidelines. We don't design our app specifically for that population.
Oh, of course.
And so it's always a challenge because yes, there's always going to be this group that can't use the app or doesn't benefit from the app, or another group that can't interact with it in a certain way. We're always trying to improve that and increase access. One of the ideas here is voice notes, being able to record pain using voice, and then we have to use voice dictation. That's another opportunity that we're exploring, for example. But we try to leverage what the operating system already has in place as opposed to create something app specific.
Oh, of course. And I think more the concept around, has there been kind of those lived experience and digital accessibility, the kind of inclusive design expertise gone in, or in the future?
Yeah, I think it's probably more in
development?
the future. I mean, it's a challenge. Funding is a common theme. It's a challenge here. So we're just trying to get integrated into as many services as possible. A lot of the projects mentioned today, we're kind of in the background. So the Pain Canada module is being distributed through our platform. TPS is kind of being delivered through our platform. There's a couple of other initiatives that we're working on as well. The Progress Over Pain initiative, for example, everyone gets access to our application as well. So we're constantly trying to evolve and address some of those needs as well.
Thanks for letting me put you on the spot with that.
No problem.